I have a question for you. Do you ever think about your identity in this world? If so, how do you identify yourself? If not, and nor had I until the other day, did you know that understanding and knowing your identity is so important? Why, you might ask? Let's take a look. Identity is crucial for several reasons. It's like a compass in our lives. It guides us with a sense of who we are and where we fit into the world. It gives us a steady sense of self over time, and it helps us navigate through life's ups and downs. By connecting us to groups, communities and cultures, our identity fosters a comforting sense of belonging and support. When we have a strong positive identity, it boosts our self-esteem and confidence, and it makes us feel valued and capable. Now, this understanding of ourselves builds resilience. It helps us face challenges with a stable foundation. In addition, our identity shapes how we interact with others, forming the basis for meaningful relationships and effective communication. Now, in essence, identity is at the heart of who we are and how we thrive in the world. I think that what you're about to hear today about identity will open your eyes either to a concept that you've never investigated before, because I hadn't, or one that you'll want to know more about. I'm Kate Mason, and welcome to Parenting and Personalities. This is the podcast that connects you to the ones that you care about the most. TEDx speaker Michelle Scheibner utilises neuroscience and narrative storytelling to help people uncover their personal brand identity story, using it to nail their niche and proactively shape their visibility to attract business, life and growth opportunities. Throughout her career, her purpose has always been to bring clarity, purpose and energy for change to her clients. From teaching to training, presenting to facilitating, coaching and mentoring, this goal has never wavered. Michelle is the author of Hush, her newly released memoir, unravelling the unintended legacy of family secrets. Hi, Michelle. Welcome back. I'm really looking forward today to hearing and learning more about you and your book, Hush.
I'm happy to be here. I'm really looking forward to this conversation because I know you've read Hush, so I'm really interested to hear.
I have, and there are so many questions that I have that are really interesting about the book, but the title is The Unintended Legacy of Family Secrets, so what made you decide to write Hush? What family secrets were in your life?
Oh, gosh, where to start? Where do I start?
Where do you start?
Look, in summary, in 2016, I lost somebody very close to me after a cancer journey. I would consider he was a soulmate. We weren't intimate partners at the time, but our lives were intimately connected. And I had known grief before. I'd lost my father in my early 20s. I'd lost my mother when I was 40. So I knew grief, and I thought I knew how to manage it, but this was different. This was like losing Chris had opened up so many layers of grief that I just didn't, I was not managing myself through it well at all. And I needed to find help, and I found a psychotherapist, and I found myself introducing myself to her and saying, look, I'm not a mother, I'm not a partner, I'll never be a grandmother, I'm no longer a next of kin, I'm kind of not ticking any of the boxes. By the way, I'm the daughter of a Holocaust survivor. And the other part was I was an only child, and I didn't have a sibling. So whilst I had friends, I didn't have anywhere to turn to. And the thing that was really, I didn't feel anybody was hearing my grief. I didn't feel understood. And I discovered within that I didn't understand. I didn't understand it myself. And that began the journey in order to resolve all of those gaps. I needed to uncover some stuff. And I thought it was just going to be a quick, so tell me about your mother, tell me about your father. And then, but Sarah who was the therapist, was very much about encouraging me and supporting. I think in the book I say she continued to illuminate the path for me. So rather than give me 5 steps to freedom or 5 steps to self-understanding, she held the light and just gently nudged me forward to do some digging around and try and join the dots. And that was how I started the unhushing, really.
And when you talk about that, there was so much avoidance of stuff through your family that you were conscious of, obviously, but never really came out, in that sense of, being aware of things but not ever speaking of things.
Yeah.
So can you tell us a little bit about that through your life, what those secrets were?
The first time I became aware that there was information I wasn't getting was as a child. I found a photo of a baby and I assumed it was me, and I kind of held it up and said, I'll point it, yeah, it's me. Mm-hmm. No, it's not. And then I think, in retrospect, I think the only reason they told me it wasn't was because it had my brother's name on the back, written on the back. So clearly.
Oh, okay.
No, well, I couldn't read.
Had you seen that?
But at some point I was going to see that,
right,
I guess,
right.
they thought, or someone would read it to me. And I was told that, yes, they'd had a baby before me and he had died soon after birth with this condition called blue blood. I mean, I was a child. I did not question that. And so I went on to be raised in a home with older parents and no siblings. When I was in year 12, 17, 18 and needed a birth certificate, they didn't have a choice. They had to give me my birth certificate. And when I looked on that, I could see, yes, indeed, there had been a baby boy born before me. Mm-hmm. But I could also see that there was no date of death in there. And so I kind of held it up and I said, there's no date of death here. And it was that point that they told me he had been born with Down syndrome, and the doctors had recommended that the best thing they could do, he was profoundly impacted by this and he wouldn't live a long life, and the best thing that they could do would be to put him into a home where he would be looked after, and they should go home and make another baby, which is what they did, and I was the replacement baby. And I don't know. Suddenly I was no longer an only child.
That's huge.
But I didn't know what that meant. And they would not give me any further information. When I was then an adult and I was engaged to be married, I thought I'd been thinking a lot about this. The assumption would be I would have children. And I spoke to the GP, who urged me to go to the genetic clinic at the Royal Women's Hospital where I could be tested and determine whether the chances of me giving birth to a Down syndrome child. But I quickly found out that in order for that to take place, I needed a blood test from my brother, and my mother wouldn't give me the information. She said, I don't know what happened to him, so I can't help you. I rang the institution he'd been sent to, and they couldn't help me either. They didn't have anyone in the records with the surname Scheibner. And so that was it. That was the end of that conversation. And so that was a secret. I now know that the family conspired to keep that secret from me. I now know that my aunt knew, in fact, used to go with my mother to visit him. I know that the cousin that Mum was very close to would come and stay, and they would go and visit him. I know that she took him birthday presents, but none of that was shared with me. So it was a gap. It was a gap.
What a lot of secrets for your mum.
Huge.
Yes.
Huge.
And huge for your mum as well, to have kept those parents to have kept those secrets from you. Like massive impact. Yes. So what did you do with that then?
Look, I think I developed some resentment about that. I had a good relationship with my mother, but we never spoke about anything below the surface. I know, I see in retrospect. We could speak for hours, but it wasn't about anything meaningful. She avoided anything meaningful. And I think she died of grief. I really think grief killed her. But it was when Sarah said to me many, many years later, imagine what it would have been like for your mum when she was pregnant with you, knowing that her last pregnancy resulted in a Down syndrome baby. She would have been in constant high anxiety, and we now know that anxiety, I think either she or Kari Dunlop said to me, it's like as a baby you would have been marinating in cortisol in the womb.
Right. That's an interesting concept, isn't it? Yeah.
So I would have been absorbing my mother's anxiety and grief.
Stress. Yeah.
And this is where I started. Going, okay. So by the time I was born, I'd experienced grief in vitro. And this, we now know, is a physical thing. There is a research. We now know that this is exactly what can happen, in the same way that children can absorb, if their mothers are taking drugs, alcohol, fetal syndrome, all of those things. It's another process, only it's grief. So I had this pot of grief in my sister, and then if I go to my father's side of the family, well, he was sad. My memory of him is he was constantly tired and sad. And now when people say to me, why did you write Hush? The first thing I think of is I was tired and sad from my earliest memory. And now I know that it didn't start with me. So now I know that I was in a situation where I also inherited my father's grief at growing up in pre-war Germany, but still within a war zone, in the Ruhr War when he was a child. He'd experienced grief. He'd experienced the grief of his parents leaving their faith behind in order to convert from Judaism to Protestant to survive the Holocaust, only they didn't survive and were murdered in a death camp. He was sent first to the US, then to Australia. His grief, he brought that grief with him. He then found himself interned as an alien when he, without state, when he got here. And there is evidence that I've uncovered that would suggest he was bullied by Nazis in that internment camp, and that he had clearly suffered some degree of PTSD. Now, we know epigenetically that can be passed on to the next generation, and if we don't deal with that, to the next generation, which is why the whole field of epigenetics for both health and well-being is just growing such legs, because we understand that many of our challenges in life, for many people, it did not start with them. Whilst the first research was done with Holocaust survivors, the second research, which supported all of that, was done with the children of women who were pregnant during 9/11 and the anxiety that they experienced during that terrorist attack and the impact that that had on their unborn children. And
what were the results?
Well, the results were that those children are now, well, they're young adults, aren't they? And they're experiencing what would seem to be the same inherited trauma responses as we saw with Holocaust survivors. And it can play out in all sorts of ways. It can actually play out in bipolar, chronic depression, or it can be the other end of the spectrum for me, which was just more about, I don't know, I'm scared of everything. I was scared of loud noise. I was scared of animals. I was scared of the dark. I was scared of doctors, dentists. I was scared of pretty much everything. And the question is, would it have been different if I'd known and I had been raised in an environment with a couple of parents who were able to talk about this, so that I grew up understanding it rather than growing up hiding it and not understanding the impact that it had on my choices, because I didn't have children. I found myself in toxic relationships because I didn't have a strong enough inner sense of who I was. So soon as somebody showed some interest in me, it was like, oh, they see something in me. They see me. Yeah, okay. And, there are people out there who are good at making others feel good so that they can control them and manage them. And all of those things started to unfold. And I was ashamed. I grew up in an era where it was expected that you would get married and you would have children. And the first question I was asked the other day, I met some people, oh, do you have children? Well, no, I don't. And for all my life, that was a question, all my adult life, I really struggled to answer because I felt like a failure. I felt ashamed because I hadn't had children. I felt ashamed because I'd never married. I felt a failure. And so my business brand was very important to me because it enabled me, to hide behind something that didn't require personal information. So I became an expert at answering a question with a question so that people didn't get to see everything that I wasn't. They could see what I was, the identity that I allowed them to see.
How has that changed for you now then, with your coaching and with your life? Has the writing of this book just made you feel better about yourself overall? What's the result of facing all of this stuff? Because it's been a huge journey for you. And I don't always like the word journey, but it is a journey. It has been a huge journey for you to get to where you are today. And writing this book is pouring out your whole life in and rediscovering all of the events that have happened throughout it. Do you find happiness at the end of this, or is there still soul searching, a lot of soul searching? Did it bring a sense of relief?
Oh, it brought a massive sense of relief. And I think the end of my TED talk, I say I now know that I am enough. Do we need an identity label to be validated? I didn't have an identity label that I felt validated me other than my professional identity and that label. To know that I haven't failed, that circumstances failed me, I don't think, and we see this when we start looking at the research, we start seeing that people often have struggles around finances, certainly around health, certainly around well-being, certainly within careers and relationships. It's difficult for us to maintain healthy relationships and healthy work and all the rest of it. When there are people missing in the family system, we we need to resolve that. And my brother was missing, my grandparents were missing, my cultural heritage was missing. And so now I know that I have all of those things. I can talk about them in a resolved way, which I think leads, for me, I would say that once you resolve those secrets, you can then heal. It's very hard to heal when you don't know what it is that you're resolving.
Yes.
I show up in my work very differently. I found my, the idea that purpose, is again one of those words. It's become one of those words. But I now have a purpose for why I do what I do. I know that. So one of the other learnings that I have is that we are often driven by a fear. Well, pretty much we all have a fear that we don't speak about. The fear for me was that, and this was really highlighted in COVID, was that being single, not being a mother, etc., the likelihood of me dying and nobody knowing was one thing. The second thing was, well, who was going to remember? It would be like I didn't exist. It would be like, there were no children to remember me or want to do the family history, or who do I pass on this to or whatever. There was no legacy. I was not leaving a legacy. Now, with Hush, I'm leaving a legacy. And I know it's resonating with people. I know that it's helping other people feel heard and seen and feel a sense of belonging and feeling they're understood. And that is, my goodness, that brings me such joy and I know that my life has meaning now. And, look, yes, I show up in my work very differently. I show up everywhere. Do you show up
in your life differently?
In my life differently.
Yeah.
Oh, my goodness, yes. I love it when people say, well, I want what you're having.
Yes.
To quote that film.
Cool.
But it's kind of, I have a much lighter energy. And that's not just how I feel. That's how people who know me feel. It was funny, I had a call from someone who came to the book launch, who I've known since my first year of teaching, who has read Hush, and she rang me. I said, I just want to tell you that now, having seen you at the launch and knowing you from those first days of teaching, it's like you totally fit what you were visually presenting. But now I can see the layers, and it's like you've really stepped in to who you are. It's taken a long time. It's taken a long time, but I'm there. How
you
cool.
are. And also, though, revealing yourself, like it's kind of, to quote, a warts and all journey in that sense. Revealing yourself is really quite confronting too, because you're right out there on paper. Everyone's reading about you. And I know it's your healing process, but it still is confronting. But the beautiful part is that it's a story that bring people closer to you. Do you get what I mean? It's a story that make... Yes.
I think that we learn when we see ourselves reflected in the stories of others. If we don't tell those stories, then we don't learn, because we don't think that there's anyone else out there who's faced what we've faced. I think learning to write memoir was learning to understand that you use your story in order to help somebody else. So I've chosen the stories in the book as ones that I think will resonate with people. It isn't about, this isn't about I want sympathy. This is about, I understand this now. I understand what I was doing in that situation. I'm not proud of it, but I understand that it didn't start with me. And I want the reader to feel that. I want the reader to think about, what are those things that I'm always complaining about? What are the fears that I have that I don't share with anyone? What are the parts of my life that I'm afraid to share with anybody? Why might that be? And what might be the impact of really uncovering that and resolving that? They're the people who are reading Hush. And I think not one person finishes Hush and doesn't think about their own life. So they won't remember those stories about me. What they'll remember the next week and a month later is, were there secrets? Was there anything unresolved for my parents or their parents? What might have been different for them? You know, if we read Gabor Mate, the Myth of Normal, we now know I thought I was raised in a very normal environment. I wasn't. But I didn't think. I thought it was normal. What is normal? The Myth of Normal tells us that so much of life, what life gives us in terms of physical health, mental health, well-being, sits on our DNA in some way, begins with trauma and not our own trauma. It can begin with the generation before and the generation before, and it is likely to be repeated. We can't, it's in the science. We can't now say, yeah, that's a nice idea, Michelle, but, you know, what's your next book about?
Yeah. I love that it's in the science, because there are some very factual scientific people out there who need the science, really need the science to understand these things and to discuss them.
Yeah.
And I think too that, you know, if someone's listening right now and they do feel lost and they are not sure what they're doing and they need help, self-direction, and perhaps they have, if they read your book and they find they're sitting in those family secrets, that it is obviously something that you really need to investigate in order to move forward with your life in that sense. But it is also really stressful to investigate that stuff. You know, like, it's very, you have to be very ready for it. It's it's something that I don't think people go, oh, I'd love to head back into all of that and go over all of that material that might re-stress me more before I come out of it, you know, because it is. So do you find that most people that come to you or want to talk to you about these things are people that have reached their limit like you did?
Oh, I think this is what happens, Kate. I really do. I think it's when you don't address something at some point, and it's often triggered by grief, like relationship separation, redundancy, all the things that in life that tend to trigger other stress can trigger this. Where there are patterns with anniversaries of deaths and birthdays and repeating numbers and so on, that might be the time that it comes to the surface. So for many people, if they don't see a reason to do it, they won't do it. And that's perfectly fine, because there is no incentive. So the first thing is, sometimes, in my case, I didn't see it. It was the grief of a death that really triggered that for me. The second thing is, I had been searching all my life. I mean, let's be clear. I am a searcher of information and trying to understand myself. I was casting horoscopes. I went and studied astrology and was casting horoscopes before I was 21, hoping that I'd find some answers in that. Didn't know what I was looking for, but just knew I had to. I'd been a spiritual healer. I had studied Reiki. I had been to a kinesiologist. I had done every form of personal development that I could find. I was reading books on quantum energy. I'd read The Secret, how to set an intention. I was trying to set affirmations every day. Nothing was leading me to ever feel to get rid of this loss and pain. And so if you're one of those people out there listening to this, and you are someone who's tried a lot of things, yoga, I've tried yoga, Pilates, everything. If you're one of those people and you still feel there's something something missing or something not quite right or something niggling, or you find yourself complaining about something about somebody else, and we know that that's often a reflection to ourselves of something we need to address, then this might be something for you to consider.
Fantastic words of advice and amazing story, and thank you so much for being here with us. Michelle, how can our listeners find you and your book?
So they can go to michellescheibner.com, and if they tab on author, it will take you to links for Booktopia, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, both Amazon Australia and international. They could go straight to Booktopia and order it. They could go to their local bookshop and order it. They can also find me on LinkedIn at Michelle Scheibner LinkedIn /Michelle Scheibner, and they can find me on Instagram, the Identity Activator.
That's wonderful. And look, I've really enjoyed having you on, and I wish you all the best going forward. You know, you are an amazing woman, and I'm sure there are a lot of people out there that might relate to you and find great solace in the fact that they're not alone, and they can too find their own inner peace. So thank you.
Thank you, Kate.
Forming our identity is a fascinating journey, and it's shaped by a blend of many factors. Our personal experiences, from the joys and challenges in childhood to the milestones of adulthood, significantly influence who we become. Family life, education, friendships, and pivotal life events all leave their mark. Society and culture also play a crucial role. The norms and values around us guide our beliefs and behaviours. Our genetics and biology contribute too, influencing our physical traits and some personality aspects. Cultural heritage, traditions, language, and ethnic background add another rich layer to our identity. As you now know, identity is so important for the human psyche. I hope our conversation today has not only brought up questions for you, but answered some as well. Thank you for listening to Parenting and Personalities. If you enjoyed this episode, we'd love it if you could leave a rating and a review that would help others learn about this podcast. If you're interested in discovering more about you and your family's personality types, you'll find my book, Who Is This Monster or Treasure in My House, on Booktopia or Amazon. If you have an episode idea, please send a note to thepersonalitycoach@gmail.com. Many thanks to our producers at Stories and Strategies, and we'll see you next time.